guys, thanks so much for coming back this week. We're very excited to be able to sit down and talk with Melody Welton.
Good job.
Oh, thank you. I had to practice that 3 times. But we're excited. She's been around the church family for a very, very long time. And we've actually never really had a great opportunity to sit down and chat. So I think this will be a ton of fun. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's
excited.
exciting. Well, have you seen the podcast at all?
I haven't seen it, but I listened to it.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So one of the things that our hope in this is just we just want people to get to know you, kind of figure out, your story, who you are, your history, what Jesus has meant to you, and just have just a conversation. So I know you're a teacher.
Yes.
What grades?
I teach kindergarten, so 5-6-year-olds.
Amazing.
Yeah, the beginning. I like to get them at the beginning of their educational career so that I can really instill that joy and love of learning.
Come on,
in them
that's great.
I still remember my kindergarten teacher.
You do? Oh, I'm so happy you said that
do,
because
but-
I'm like, remember me. I put so much into you. I think about you all the time. Don't forget me.
Kindergarten was a lot different when I went to school than what it is now.
Oh my gosh, it's like first grade now.
Right, but I remember she was always so good at giving us the best snacks before we took a nap.
That's
it was
if only
amazing.
naps still existed
I
in
know,
kindergarten.
right?
Oh my gosh.
Could you imagine?
I too remember my kindergarten teacher.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Are you? Oh my god.
This is a true
That's
story.
making me
My
so happy.
mom started off my academic career thinking I was going to be amazing. Because in kindergarten, I got a plaque, a little piece of paper at the end of the year that said Student of the Year.
Wow.
Yes.
Did everybody get one?
No.
Oh wow.
I was no seriously right. I wanted the same thing. I got a little piece of paper, and my mom. I remember it was the last day of school. She's picking me up. My kindergarten teacher hugged my mom. I was like, it was really weird. Like they just became close that year. My mom was like on the PTA or something,
Oh, I love building relationships.
Yeah, she was. So they gave a big hug. I got this thing. They took my picture, and mom went home. She thought I was just giving me this great. That was the last award I ever got in school. Except in 8th grade, I got most improved. But to get most improved, you have to be really bad the year before.
Yeah.
But my mom, she had high hopes in kindergarten.
Yeah. My students are always like, "You're my favorite teacher." I'm like, well, I'm your first teacher. So.
No, they have preschool.
Come on.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
And the parents teach them stuff.
Yes,
Yeah.
You're right. So I'm like, oh, thank you so much. Just in a couple years, come back and tell me that.
Right.
That's awesome.
It will mean a lot more.
What made you want to be a teacher?
Good question. I think that's one of my big passions is education.
Yeah.
And I actually wanted to go into school. I wanted to go into theater.
Yeah.
So I applied to Western's theater program, and I didn't get in, which is ridiculous, to be honest.
Way to blow at Western.
I know. Like, my audition, I probably was not as well prepared for that. But then I just went and I declared journalism because I was like, I can't go to university with an undeclared major. Like, that's not okay. That's not cool. I like writing, so I'll just do journalism. And my first journalism class I took, I hated it. It was like the communication 101. It was awful. And I just sat there my first semester at school, and I was like, I hate this. And this is the prereq for all the other classes. So I vividly remember driving around Western's campus and finally talking to God about it and be like, what should I do? He's like, oh, you're finally going to ask and seek me and like figure out the rest of your life. And as soon as I asked, education, teacher dropped into my heart.
Yeah.
And I went straight to the office where you change like your major, and I declared being a teacher, education, like minoring in all the creative arts and everything like that, so I could still have that like theater and drama and everything. But I thought then about all the times with all my siblings. I have a lot of siblings. I have 8 of them.
Yeah.
So I'm the 4th. I have 5 younger ones, and
3 olders.
Yeah, 3 older.
Okay.
So 5 younger siblings, and when I was in school, like 5th grade, I started writing a book, and I would write it, and after every chapter, I would make all my little siblings sit in front of me and do a read aloud. Be like, okay, and they'd be like, okay, next chapter, and then I just would keep writing the book. I never finished the book, but hopefully one day.
You should definitely finish it. That's cool.
I mean, the storyline definitely needs some tweak.
Just roll with it.
But I thought about all those times when I was when I was making my younger siblings be my students, and was like, oh, I like this. And of course, like read aloud, part of that too is like having your own stage is my favorite part of the day.
That's really cool. When I was getting out of high school, again, I wasn't a great student, but I remember I qualified to go to college and won. But I think the only thing I'd want to be is a teacher.
Really?
Yeah, it was kind of what I thought I wanted to be. So I signed up. I took a racquetball class. I aced it. Yeah. And then every other class that I signed up for, I didn't do as well.
Could have been a gym teacher.
But I thought that's what I want to be as a teacher. And I think some of the teachers I had on my journey, I didn't have the most ideal childhood, but I had some really good teachers, who would listen and, and I remember in 4th grade, I was in a 4th, 5th split. Do they still do splits in school?
Not as much, but I actually taught a kindergarten, 1st grade split.
Okay. And I remember that was I was in 4th grade, and the teacher, I couldn't understand the teacher. She had a very, very strong accent, and she was a 4th, 5th split. It was a really difficult year, but I remember the very next year, the teacher I got was amazing, and it changed my whole perspective on everything. And so I've always really had a good appreciation for teachers, and even in my high school, I had some amazing teachers. So anytime I find out somebody's a teacher, I'm like, oh, cool, what made you want to do that?
Yeah, oh, that's so good to hear.
No one ever says summer's off. No one ever says I wanted to do it because the summer's off.
Oh my gosh, yeah. How many times? My brother-in-law just showed me this list of things, if you talk to every other occupation the way you talk to teachers, and it's all the things that people say to teachers that you're just okay, well, I don't actually have summers off. This summer I'm teaching summer school, or you have to get another job because you're paid for the time you work, and then they just pay you maybe a little bit less so you can make it. And then I always am you do a year's worth of work in 9 months, absolutely. 10 months. But there's so many things people say to teachers that I constantly am people still think that way? You think you can be a teacher just because you went to school? You can be a kindergarten teacher because you were a kindergarten student? That's really interesting. Okay.
I remember do you guys have this in first school? When I was in I can remember 5th, 6th grade, I was in the principal's office. I know. But there was a sign on, all my principals knew me well. There was a sign on his wall that said, everything I ever needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten. And it had a list of sharing and nap, quiet time. And it was really interesting. I remember in 5th grade sitting there why am I still here? I've already learned this all. But kindergarten teachers it's a very unique thing because it is a foundational beginning to your education journey. So I bet that's pretty exciting.
It really is. It's so fun just to be able to not only teach them how to, because my kids come to me at the beginning of the year and they don't know how to read, they don't know how to write, they don't know how to do anything. They don't know how to tie their shoes, they don't know how to, some kids don't know how to go to the bathroom properly. It's just so many things. They're I didn't know this is what I signed up for. Right. But then at this point in the year, right now we're wrapping up this school year, they can read, they can write, they can do things that I can physically see the difference of. They couldn't write anything and now they can write stories. I'm that was me. I did that. I'm amazing. Oh my gosh. But we talked about it a lot with during everything happening with COVID and the pandemic. A lot of schools had to do virtual teaching. Yeah. And kindergarten with virtual teaching, we're we don't just teach them content. In high school, you teach them skills and so many life skills and how to, my kids are struggling with how to work in a group and how to, share things because everything is don't touch, separate, all that. And so it really, you see the gaps when you can't do it the way that we used to do it. But.
Yeah, because Nicole, she's done just online. So, for a year and a half now, I think.
Wow. And Nicole is your daughter.
Yeah, she's my daughter. She's a senior, so she's almost done. But the past year and a half, she's just done online. And can I tell you, brutal. Thank God that she doesn't expect me to help, because I have absolutely nothing about anything that they do in high school anymore. But it is very different. She's just doing her own thing and she can do it whenever she wants. But a friend of ours has 3 little girls who are in school and they're first in kindergarten, preschool. So different. She's they need that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Sitting in front of a computer, it's just they didn't learn anything or comprehend. And
it's interesting, isn't it?
It is. We had to do virtual for 10 days. after there was a holiday, and it was the most emotionally, mentally draining 10 days of my life.
Oh, I bet.
I'm glad we had that experience because we have to do so much more in school than we used to as far as keeping things clean and the kids zoning and all that kind of stuff, like cohorting them. But I talk to my class about that all the time. Like when they do certain things, I'm like, you didn't wash your hands, or like we wear masks all day, which they're so good with. Kids are so much better with it than most adults. But I'll be like, do you want to be at home learning through the screen? They're like, no, like I don't want to go back to that. I'm like, okay, then let's do everything we can.
Just torture. Just torture. Like, yes. That's amazing.
So, but yeah, it's such an interesting time to be a teacher.
It is a very interesting time. Can I ask you a funny teacher question?
Of course.
Do teachers think that PE teachers are as worthless as students do?
Carl.
I've always wanted to ask this question.
I have two parts. That, oh my gosh, you're putting me in such like a tight spot.
Sure, I apologize.
Okay. It depends on the teacher.
There you go. Great answer.
I have a friend who is an amazing PE teacher.
Yeah.
He is. Yeah. He's phenomenal. He doesn't teach at my school.
Okay.
I'm not going to say anything about that. But he got so creative when everything went into lockdown, and he had to get his students to do things like showing videos in his living room of getting these different games.
Really?
Well, I mean, like take a walk and nature hike. And but my friend did not do that. He figured out ways of making them interact.
That's cool.
With different, where you had to jump up and not get different things or putting shoes into bikes, and the kids pedal in front of the screen, and they're things that creative.
So
things.
1 out of a couple hundred.
Yeah, I mean I never had. I was homeschooled actually up until high school.
Okay. So
Which when I went to school to be a teacher, they're like, "That's interesting. How does your mom feel about you becoming a teacher?" I'm like, "She wishes there were more people like me. Then she would have had to homeschool me. Like she loves it."
That's brilliant.
I actually don't know what she thinks about it.
I'm sure she loves it.
She loves it. So I had a PE teacher in 4th and 5th grade, and he was
terrible.
Not great.
I agree.
Not great.
Did you have one in high school?
Yes.
Right. Do all teachers think that's hilarious like students do?
Well, normally they do something else besides just PE, right?
Yeah, my gym teacher taught a history class that he typically slept through. I'm just saying that
it just depends. It really does depend on the teacher. I would say majority of the time, when they get to elementary school, they've already been through teaching high school and middle, and they just keep passing them down. We're like, you've had a great career. Maybe retire.
I mean, how hard is it to play dodgeball? I'm just saying.
There's so much you can do, though. I know some people want to be PE teachers, and it's so hard to get in because there's only one PE teacher versus how many classroom teachers. But I would say we don't think that we don't have the same, in my community of educators, don't have that exact opinion. But it just depends.
It's similar.
Yeah.
It's in the ballpark.
Maybe.
I'm not out of the stadium.
Plead the fifth.
I didn't have
Next
PE,
question.
So.
I have always wanted to know. That's a big question. My cousin was a teacher. Mm-hmm. And so her first few years, she'd have to grade papers, right? And I'd go over there at night. She had a little daughter and hang out with her. And she was grading papers all night, right? Mm-hmm. And I would be like, hey, what do you think of your gym teacher? She'd be like, I'm not telling you. And I'm like, unbelievable.
It's like you want to pull back the curtain.
I just want to know. I always want to know because I thought, did you actually go to school to do this? Is that how? But typically, no. They went to school to be a teacher, and they end up being a gym teacher at some point. Mm-hmm.
Typically, the ones I know who are amazing at it, that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
Right. They were. Sometimes they're like, "Do you want to do this anymore? You don't have to."
There's other options.
There's other things you can do. So.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. You wanted to be a teacher too, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yep.
You wanted to teach music.
Oh,
I
went
went
to
to college
that.
for music. Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
Did you sing, play?
Band. I wanted to. Yeah. I wanted to be a band teacher.
Nerd. Oh, I was a drum major in high school.
Really?
I loved marching band.
Yeah. Ready?
I know.
The wands.
Theater marching band.
With the wands.
Well, that's the directors.
Yeah, the
use
director.
wands.
That's what I
On
wanted.
the field, I was using my hands full.
I was
swing
just
motion.
marching with the clarinet.
I played the clarinet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you played. That's so fun.
That was my major that I did, but I can play all of them in the band. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Then she met me, and that dream kind of died. Sorry about
Gosh,
that.
it's been years since.
Did
I
you
played
guys
the
meet
clarinet.
at school?
No. I was a DJ.
Okay.
And I did.
Oh my gosh.
I did a college night once a week at this place, and Mandy was a college student that would come to the college night, and I saw her in her bib overalls, in her Abercrombie and Fitch shirt.
Coming back. It's all coming back.
And I told the guy sitting next to me, I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna marry that girl," and he laughed at me because he knew her. He's like,
Stop
"There's
it.
no way she
This
would
is
go for
adorable.
you." And she did. I reeled her in. I reeled her in. But yeah, that's how we met. I had at that point, because I'm 2 years older, so I had already. I mean, college clearly wasn't going to be for me at that stage in my life, and so I did this racquetball class and thought I better just get on with myself, you know. But she was heading places when I snagged her.
Yeah.
I'm sure her parents were thrilled she met me.
They were.
Well, you guys, now look at the places you've gone together. So
It's been amazing. I've been married
amazing.
22 years.
22 years.
22
Oh,
years.
that's amazing.
I know we don't look that old,
Congratulations.
right?
No,
No, right?
not at all. I would never have guessed that.
We went to the mall yesterday. Would you like to hear a funny story about the mall?
I can't remember the last time I heard somebody say we went to the mall.
Yeah, that's how old we are.
Yeah.
So we went to the mall, and we're walking by. Do you probably, I don't know if you know the store, The Buckle?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. So we walk by it, and Mandy goes, "Oh, do you remember when The Buckle was popular?" I think it still is. And I was like, "Let's go in." So we walked in. We were the oldest people by 20 years, right? And this lady comes up. I'm like, "Hey, let me ask you a question." I asked her about a style of jeans. I'm like, when are those coming back into style? And she's like, "Oh, they're back in style now." And I'm like, "Look at this. I'm cool again. I'm back," you know?
That's amazing.
I said, "Do you remember these from the 90s?" And this girl looked at me like I was insane.
She's like,
I was born in 99.
in the 90s, and
Oh.
I'm like, okay.
I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh,
Like,
my
we
bad."
were married in the 90s, so.
Yeah, we'd already been married a little while when she was born. So,
Wow. Well, there you
but
go.
it's fun getting older and like looking, like watching things that like go in and out of fashion. You know, and I think about that all the time in society and in the world. Like you just watch this wave of. Like everything, it all comes back, you know, and it all goes. And so, you know, my prediction, a couple years, I'll be wearing bib overalls again.
They're already
I mean,
back.
I
Yeah.
agree with Mandy. They're already back. I would wear them.
Yeah, you can't find them
Out
anywhere.
out in the the country where I live.
I live in the country as well.
I don't believe you. I don't agree.
That's awesome. So how long have you been a teacher?
I've been a teacher. How long have I been a teacher? This is going to age me now. I know I look very young.
Very young.
Very young.
I have been a teacher for 13, 14 years.
No way.
No
really?
way. Are you kidding?
I'm not
Wow.
kidding.
So your first group of students would be in what grade now?
Would they be seniors?
It's really hard because I graduated from Western and I left the country. I was
Yep.
like, see you later. I'm going to Korea, because why not? And I went to South Korea and I worked at international schools.
Gotcha.
So I taught, and the confusing thing is, that's why I'm trying to remember how many years I've taught, is my first year there I taught English in a Korean public school. I was like an English teacher, which is pretty normal because I didn't know anything about international schools.
Sure.
Because West Michigan,
Right.
I mean, a lot of people don't necessarily just take off and go work in other countries.
Right.
Yeah.
So I learned about them my first year there. So I was teaching English, and then I went into an international school, and I taught second grade. And then I taught a split class kindergarten and first grade. And then I taught second grade for 2 years, went to another school, taught kindergarten, first grade. Then I taught kindergarten only.
Wow.
Then I taught first grade only. And then I left Korea after 7 years, and I went to Australia. And I taught for 2 years in Australia in a fifth grade class and in a kindergarten class.
No way.
Wow.
Which was so interesting because the parents, it was so funny. I'm like teaching kindergarten in Australia, and I'm teaching phonics. And I'm the only American at this school. So the parents would come and they'd be like, where did you say you were from again? I'm like, oh, I'm from the States. I'm from Michigan. They're like, oh, my child's starting to have an accent. I was like, oh. I'm so sorry. They're like, no, we love it. It's like they're at an international school. So I was like, well, yeah.
There you go.
So I couldn't even tell you. I think
Sure.
the second graders that I taught might be graduated from high school.
It's
at
amazing.
This point.
So how long were you in Korea then? So tell me that one more time.
I was there for 7 years.
So can I talk to you about like what Christianity was like for you there? Like
Sure.
how, because that's a different place, it's a different
sure.
country, different probably
Clearly
even
a different country.
Listen, I said
Good grade in school.
hey, listen, I said
I
It's
love
a
college.
you,
different
Mandy.
place in a different country
I
than
love you
Michigan.
so much, Mandy.
Just so everybody
Yes.
I
knows.
said college wasn't great for me. I was very clear.
Sorry. Just making that clear.
But like Christianity there,
Mm-hmm.
it's viewed very different. I mean, we went to California. Christianity in California is very different than Michigan. What was it like in Korea?
That's a really good question because when I went there, it took me a while to find even a Christian community.
Oh, sure.
Well, you've got a lot of English ministries under Korean churches.
Sure.
Okay.
And I went to a few different ones, but my main group of friends, I was the token Christian.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it was, which is a side note, but it was really funny because they would be like we'd be out on the weekend and somebody would say something, and I went out a lot just to
Sure.
make myself a part of the group.
Right.
I don't like staying out till 3 a.m. I would drink water because I don't even like the taste of alcohol, but I can still have a fun time. I'll
Yeah.
still be on the dance floor,
Oh, yeah.
still enjoy life, and I needed to insert myself in the friend group so that when I wasn't there, after a couple months I was like, okay, I'm gonna go home, catch the last train, I'm gonna sleep because it's midnight. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, now that we're really good friends, I don't like doing this. I want you guys to miss me. But we would be out and someone would bring something about faith, Christianity,
Sure,
religion.
yeah.
They're like, oh, wait a minute, we have a Christian friend. Let's ask, where's Melody? She loves Jesus. And they loved it. They were like,
That's
and we have
amazing.
such different lifestyles.
Sure.
And we came from such different backgrounds because we came from all over the world.
Yeah.
But they were just like, you can have a conversation with Melody. She knows so much about Christianity and all that. And I'm like, hey. But anyway, so the first year there, because my main group of friends, none of them were Christians, there was going from an English ministry. I went to a Korean church for a while.
Sure.
And somebody sat in the back and translated for me every sermon.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Wow.
which was really cool. It's very, to answer your question, it's, there's a lot of, how do I phrase it? I love living in Korea.
Yeah.
I love the culture. I love the people there. From an outsider coming in, there was a lot of structure, and it had to be a certain way.
Yeah.
And things were just swept under the rug. There was shame was not acceptable.
Okay.
Broken families were not acceptable.
Sure.
There were
Really?
so many orphans or kids abandoned because of the shame of if it wasn't a good family situation or had a kid outside of wedlock or things like that. Nobody wanted to adopt kids if they weren't a part of their bloodline. And I shouldn't say nobody, that
Well, I
the culture.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
I want to be, yeah. It's interesting because there's so many things you can say about American culture and everything like that. And so I do want to be careful with how
Yeah, of
I
course.
phrase it. But I did feel a lot of routine, things had to be a
Yeah.
certain way and had to look a certain way. And I met so many beautiful people who were so on fire for God.
So cool.
But it was almost like you had to always be active and be doing something and
Right.
be in leadership and then do the next thing and
Yeah.
the next thing. Or there was nothing. The English ministry that I went to, this English church my first year, I kept trying to get involved because I like to, I like to be involved. I like to be I grew up in a Christian household. I got saved when I was 5.
Yeah.
I remember asking again and again, for Jesus to come into my heart just to make sure. So I was I just want to make sure. And so a couple days in a row, I'd be okay, Jesus, really? I was the kid in Sunday school who memorized all the verses and wanted to teach the class. I don't know why I didn't see
amazing.
teacher in my future then. But so after a year living in Korea and not feeling like I was getting connected, I had gotten this job at an international school where it was a 2-year contract, and I prayed. I told God, I was I can't stay here if I don't have a community of people I'm growing in faith with. I need to be encouraged and I need to feel like I'm growing. And I just wasn't able to the Korean church was wonderful, but they always had to speak English around me. I was trying to learn Korean, or they were translating, and I couldn't get as connected and involved. And then the school that I ended up working at, the international school, through a group of people there, was how I got connected with the church that I ended up. The reason I stayed there another 6 years was through this church.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it was really cool because there was a lot of international people that were a part of this church, and people coming to Korea for so many different reasons from other countries that had just radical transformations, getting involved and realizing that something was missing, and they wanted to, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Just like they realized through just visiting the church or coming and meeting people, like, this is what I've been missing, or this is what these friends are helping me grow, and just saw so many radical transformations from people doing things that were hurting their body and hurting other people, and even from churches in the States that really hurt them and broke them. They found a lot of healing just going to another country, into an English ministry, and so that was really cool.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you're there 7 years, and then you go to Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So what was church like there?
So, interestingly enough, when I went to Australia, it was through the church that I was part of in Korea.
Oh, very cool.
So it was a church plant.
Very cool.
Really?
So they planted one. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I know. So, and I was at that point like, okay, I love Korea. I loved living here, but I'm ready to go to a country where I can speak the same language, where people don't get mad at me because I have a louder voice, or I'm, tiny and loud on the subway, and all that kind of stuff that I experienced there. I was like, okay, now I'm ready to experience something new. And our church planted a location in Sydney.
Yeah, very cool.
First, and I wanted to go there. I'm like, Australia, Sydney, I want to go. And it wasn't the right timing. It wasn't. And it ended up being that I worked in the best school I've ever worked at my last 2 years in Korea. So I was like, okay, God, I see what you're doing here. Like, just gaining all these skills and really learning an amazing curriculum to teach and stuff. So then they decided, since Sydney was really good, they wanted to bring another church to Melbourne, so that there was 2 campuses in Australia. So Sydney's in New South Wales, and then Melbourne's in Victoria, or Melbourne, as Americans usually say. It's hard for me. Like, I feel like I don't want to be like a poser like Melbourne, but I'm like, I can't call it Melbourne now because I lived there for a while.
Great.
So when I went from the church campus that I was part of in Korea the location of it just made for a very diverse community. Yeah. So from people in Korea, people from everywhere. So I'm like
You're good.
jumping back
You're
and
good.
forth. But so in Korea, the campus was extremely diverse. It was like what heaven, I imagine heaven to look like.
Cool.
Like people from all different backgrounds and ethnicity and cultures, like all coming together to worship. It was so cool. And then when I went to Australia, the whole team was Korean American, Chinese American, Korean Australian, like all Asian.
Sure.
So I went and helped plant this church in Melbourne, and it was above a Korean mart, and I was the only white person in Australia. And it was so interesting. I went from, just this diverse community to, now I am, which is fine. I learned a lot, but it was very Korean.
Sure.
So I left Korea, and I moved in with a Korean. She was Korean Australian, but she grew up in Korea and moved to Australia when she was like 14, 15. And I had never lived with a Korean before, and the cultural difference there were really tough.
Yeah.
And then my campus community was majority Asian, and so I felt more of that Korean American church culture in Australia than I ever felt it in Korea. Yeah. So it was really interesting. It was a small community, and I was the only American that was at my school, like I mentioned before, I worked with all Australians. It was amazing how I got the job. My best friends that I met in Korea had moved to Australia 5 years before.
Wow.
And I don't think they were married at the time, but he had worked at this school and he had to fly back to Canada and move back in the middle of the school year. So he convinced them to give me an interview and give me a long-term sub position to take over his class.
Wow.
Because I had just moved there and I just got my license registered in Victoria. And he was like, I have to leave, but I have the perfect replacement. So I went in, 10-minute interview, got the job, was a long-term sub, interviewed to become a full-time employee, but that meant they had to sponsor my visa, which is unheard of.
Yeah,
in Australia, it's very hard to stay past a year or however the visas work. And they were willing to pay
to
keep me there because, I'm a really great teacher.
You got a gift, right?
So that's when I went from the 5th grade classroom to kindergarten. But living in Australia was so much harder than living in Korea.
Interesting.
Really? Why?
Because I looked like most of the people that I work with, so they expected me to know things that I didn't know or to think in ways that I didn't think, because all of the people I worked with had grown up in Australia. It was learning another curriculum again, learning how to teach. I had to change everything from my handwriting. When I taught kindergarten, their handwriting is different. So teaching them how to, I had to change the way I did, my P's and my B's and just random things like that, train my brain to write words differently because they add U to, the, a Commonwealth country kind of thing. They are Commonwealth country, but I always joke with people who I know from the UK and Australia. I'm like, oh, that's such a Commonwealth thing, and they're like, but it was so difficult because there were so many words they said that were different, even though we spoke the same language.
Sure. Like what? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I had this huge list going in my phone because I'd be like, wait, what did you just say? And I write it down, from expressions like sticky beak, which means to be nosy.
Sticky beak?
Sticky beak.
Be a sticky beak and listen in on what they're saying.
I love that, actually.
First time my friend told me that, I was like, what? Or I had this parent-teacher conference with a parent, and I could not understand what she was trying to ask me because she was using it, and I can't remember the expression because I didn't write it down. But basically, I finally figured out that she was asking if her daughter was a tattletale. But tattletale is a very American phrase.
Sure.
I didn't realize that and was like, so the way she was asking, she's like, no, I'm not worried about her academically. I love that she has friends, and she was trying to go, I'm like, and I'm trying to be like, this is first parent-teacher conference. I'm a former teacher in Australia. I want the parents to like me and know that I know what I'm doing in my job. And so I'm just talking around what she's saying until finally I was like, oh, no, she's not. She's not like that at all. But those instances happened every single day where a coworker would make fun of me in a joking way for being American or something like that. And every single day, multiple times a day, you're kind of like, oh, okay, I'm different. Okay, yep, I am different. Okay.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Whereas
I thought it would have
Korea,
been easier.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, you're fine.
Korea, the expectations weren't as high because I didn't look like that. Koreans, I didn't look like them. I didn't speak their language, though I tried to learn. And it was so interesing. It was so much harder living in Australia.
Did they have any sticky beak phrases in Korea?
In Korea, they had the way the language works is when you speak in Korean, it's opposite. And I get this is probably the same way with a lot of languages. But if you ask for something, like if you want water, instead of saying, oh, water, or I was about to say it the Korean way, can I please have a water? You would say, 물 주세요, which is water, please give to me. So the sentence structure is
Muchawea?
Hey, listen, me and the kids laugh at her all the time because she'll hear a word, she'll Buenas noches. So we're like, no.
I got sticky beak. That's all I know.
Sticky beak. When I was in Korea, I would listen to how they would say it, and then I would just mimic it. And then when I would see it written down, I'd be like, oh, would not have said it.
So you
that
had
way.
to teach you were teaching. What were you teaching?
So
in
because
Korea?
I was teaching at international schools in Korea, I taught. It was like it's just like if you picked up a school here and plopped it there. All the kids were from other countries. The parents wanted them to learn everything in English. So I still taught everything the same. I just had it was such a beautiful gift because the first 9 years of my teaching career, I had this exposure to different cultures and different ways of thinking before I came back to West Michigan.
That's awesome.
So how long have you been back here?
3 years.
3 years.
3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So
I guess that's 12 years of teaching. There we go.
12 years, that's good. Very close. Let me ask you a question. I know you got saved as a young girl.
Yes.
And I know that.
You want to talk about Jesus?
Right. Well, I want to talk about how Jesus interacted. Like, how did the foundation of who Jesus is in your life help you through that time in Korea and Australia and that journey? Like, not many people are just going to be like, you know what I want to do after graduating college? Move to Korea. Like, that's not how most people, I think, right? So just talk to me about how Jesus has impacted that journey and how it helped you in that season.
Yeah, I'd love to, and that's a great question. I think for me, it started when I was quite young. Like, even though I got saved young, for sure, I had a heart for other cultures and other countries. When somebody came and visited our church, the church I was part of, which is the Point Church, and before when it was New Life, this couple came and they were a part of Youth with a Mission, YWAM, in Texas. And they started talking about different things they were doing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to go somewhere. I want to meet other people and share about Jesus like they are because they're so cool and I want to be like them. So when I was 14, I flew down, my parents flew me down to Texas. They're like, if you raise enough money to do the program, we'll fly you there.
That's awesome.
So I washed walls, painted things, just did whatever I could to earn the money. And I went down to Texas, and then we went into Mexico, and that's when I felt like I realized for the first time how, and this is not the case anymore, but I was like, oh my gosh, my testimony, my life story, my faith story is so lame. I just love Jesus, and I've never doubted it, and I think he's cool, and I feel close to him, the Holy Spirit connection. I felt from when I was young too, and my parents are such a beautiful example, they were such a beautiful example of just living life in faith and loving. And then people are talking about how they were into drugs and doing this and doing that, and then God came in and radically saved them, and now I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I want that. So then, the back when you're 14, 15, 16, I'm like, should I backslide a little bit? And then come back, and thoughts that I actually had.
Oh, yeah.
Now it's funny. Now it is for sure hilarious. But then I was like, I just can't do it. That's ridiculous. I don't even want to. And it wasn't until college when God said, I have given you a beautiful testimony because I saved you from ever having to go through any of that. My keeping power is over you. And I was like, oh, thanks. That's amazing. So I'm so sorry. I like going all these side tangents to answer this one question. Yeah. But when I was 14 and did that mission trip, and then my church was a part of this ministry in the Philippines, Ministries Without Borders with Noroff and Tuna. And for a long time, we had funds that went to helping children in the Philippines who couldn't afford school supplies. And in the Philippines, education is free, but you have to be able to provide all your own supplies. So a lot of kids couldn't go to school because they didn't have backpacks, they didn't have notebooks, they didn't have anything. And for $10, you could sponsor one child being able to go to school by getting a backpack full of supplies. So I loved that. Again, I see God's foot nudging of education all along. When I was a teenager, a lot of times I wanted to give money towards these kids being able to go to school and couldn't imagine $10, that's what it takes to let a kid go to school a whole year. And so then going to school, changing my major to education, I ended up taking a year off, and I was terrified. I didn't want to take a year off school. I thought if I take a year off, I'll never go back. And God spoke to me really clearly at a conference. I saw this video of all of these couples in China, or different people in China, and they were talking about how they felt God so close to them that it didn't matter if they were persecuted in their country or if they died. They wanted people to know about Jesus. They wanted people to hear their stories of faith. And I was watching this video, and this was when I was like, I'm not taking a year off. And the whole point of taking the year off was to do some kind of like faith program, Bible program, the Rev used to be called GAP.
Yep.
That kind of, so I did GAP, but
who was on your GAP team?
My GAP team was David, Caleb, Nathan, Joseph, and oh my gosh, who was the other boy? There were 5 boys and 5 girls. Jessica Carulis. Aaron Dugan was on it. Cassie, Celia, who is Norwegian. Oh, Matt was the other guy. And then me.
That's awesome.
So I did not want to take a year off to do it. No, like it was the 3rd year of the program. I was like, nope, I'm not going to do it because everybody thinks I should do it. I like to do the opposite of what anybody tells me.
Are you and Amanda the same person?
So to come back to the video, like this whole history of like, people ask me the whole year, like, oh, what are you going to do next year? I'm like, I'm going back to school. I go to college. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to Western for my 2nd year. And this video hit me in such a way. I heard God's voice so clearly. He said, these people are willing to give up their entire life for me.
So good.
And you can't give me 1 year.
Wow.
I was like, I can! And immediately I was like, I'm doing it. And my heart changed as soon as I agreed. That was a 180-degree shift. I didn't have enough money for it. God provided the money. And I wasn't even worried about it. I was like, I don't have this money. I'm going to work all summer. Because college was, loans and grants and everything like that. And the day I was supposed to pay I don't even remember how much it was then. It was a good chunk of money for a 19-year-old.
Yeah.
Andrew came up to me and he's like, at the conference where I saw the video that God spoke to me about these Chinese missionaries, somebody came up to Andrew and said, I have 2 scholarships for you that I want you to give to students who are going to be on the GAP team. And he's like, you can give them to anyone you want. And Andrew's like, I knew one of them was for you, and it was before I even agreed to do it. And so he told me that the day the money was due when I didn't have it. I'm like, yep, that's right, because God provides. Perfect. So every time my life went in one way and I thought it was going to go in one direction, like journalism or theater, and then it ended up being education, and then I saw his handprints on that all along, and then I thought, I'm going to go straight through school, and then I took a year off, which that year was so awful. It was so hard. If I could go back and do the GAP team again, I would love to, because I feel like, when do you have a year to just grow and read the Bible and learn your faith? I was a 19-year-old mess. Like, our team was a mess. You bring all these young kids together who love Jesus. You have 5 girls and 5 boys. I mean, it was so bad. It was, and like, we grew so much. It was definitely.
Was that the last year of GAP and then it became Rev, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're like, this is it. Something's not working. Maybe we need to like readjust, I loved my team. I grew so much. But when you're with the same people every day for 10 months,
it's like your siblings. You need a break.
Exactly. So I say that to say I'm so glad I did it. It was very hard. It was very challenging. I grew a lot. If I could go back and do it again, I feel like, but that's, I guess, what life is about, right?
It's kind of part of it.
Yeah, if I could go back and do that again, I probably would have done some, more things. But then I went back to school, and because I had taken that year off, going back to school was when I made some friendships who are friends I'm with to this day, who helped me grow so much in my faith.
Yeah.
And because of that, I also got a scholarship to study abroad in South Africa.
So
I went to South Africa the 2nd semester of my 2nd year back at school, after I did the program that I did, that's called the GAP, Growth Acceleration Program. People are listening like, what are all these acronyms? So I was able to go to South Africa, and again, like this love of learning about different cultures, of being somewhere where I could talk about God. And so none of my friends were Christian there.
Sure.
Which I love. I love to be able to learn about different people and also learn, like, how can I be genuine in my faith, and how can I pray for people and learn about them and care about them and love on them the way that Jesus did.
Yeah.
So good.
Because when everybody around you is the same as you, you can't grow.
Yeah.
So that experience in South Africa, I bet you did not think this was going to take this long to answer this question.
Listen, I'm loving the journey, so you just keep going.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I talk to 5-year-olds all day, so this is just like,
right, adult conversation.
oh my gosh, I haven't talked about Jesus in so long. That's like, so South Africa happened. I went home, and because of South Africa, I learned about different programs in Asia where you could be a teacher, you could teach English, or you could do different things like that. And that's what made me be like, I still cared so much about the Philippines.
Yeah.
So Asia, Philippines, I always had a heart, because I was where you sow things like your money.
Right.
Yeah.
Like your heart goes there
Absolutely.
too. So praying for those kids who are part of that backpack program.
So cool.
I wanted to get over there somewhere so that I could experience more of it.
That's
so
brilliant.
I felt God's provision the whole way through. And I knew that if I stayed in Michigan and got a job right out of college, I love loyalty. I love building things and programs. So I knew I would have just stayed.
Sure.
So I was like, I'm going to go. And I felt that excitement urge from God based
So
on
good.
all those experiences before to go. And then when I went, my first year in living in Korea, I was able to go to the Philippines. And I was able to spend time with Noraf and Tuna, and I could see kids. And this is like years and years later, where the program went from like, we can buy 300 backpacks, to we can do 3,000, to we can do 5,000 backpacks. Wow. So I was in the Philippines, and I could see these kids with these backpacks, kids that I had been praying for years, giving money to know like they were getting an education. And then I learned more about education in the Philippines and the corrupt system of a lot of things, and the kids in the orphanage ministry and things, or I shouldn't say orphanage ministry, or kids who are orphans. So then that stirred my heart for, I love education. Now what can I do to work more with orphans and care for these kids who need mentors, they need father figures and mother figures to look up to. So when I went back to Korea, I was able to be a part of this program called Jerusalem Ministries, which is still there. And the person who led it, he was a part of the church that I was a part of.
Very cool.
And I got involved in doing that. And so all these little things, like I just felt God giving me more and more tools.
Yes.
And building me up and being with me the whole way through, even when it was hard and I'm living in different countries where people think different ways, or I'm learning different things about the culture. Moving to Australia was terrifying because I had gotten so used to Korea, I was comfortable there. And then people kept talking about how hard it was in Sydney, like the Sydney church plant team, how hard that was. I mean, church planting, you guys.
It's tough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough.
I'm gonna use that for some water. So everything they talked about being hard, I was like, oh, that's hard for them. That's not going to be
Right.
That's not going to be hard for me. What's hard for them isn't. I'm going to be fine. That's going to be great. Like God is clearly pulling me out of Korea and putting me in Australia. It's going to be wonderful. And then I realized that everybody's heart is different.
Everybody's
so
heart is
what
different.
was hard for some people wasn't hard for me.
Right.
But then I had all this other stuff that was hard for me that wouldn't have been hard
So
for
true.
somebody else.
Yeah.
And so I just feel that I'm taking so long to answer your question. But I don't even remember what the original question was, like God being with me throughout.
Like how he took you along the
How
journey.
he took me along that journey. Yeah, and there were so many moments when I was terrified of not being provided for, which is so ridiculous because from everything to, like, God has always provided for me in every way.
Yeah.
But in Korea, I had to switch schools several times.
Sure.
And it was not by my choice. Like,
Right.
as I said, I would love to be at the same place. Like,
Yeah.
when I left teaching at the public school, and I went to international school. They had to downsize because there was all these new regulations about kids that could be in international schools.
Sure.
Because a lot of Koreans would pay for their kids to learn in English to help them go somewhere else. And so our school was getting smaller. So I worked there for 2 years, and then they didn't hire me on for a third year because they were cutting a bunch of classes from 2 first grade, 2 second grade, to 1 first grade, 1 second grade. And I didn't have seniority, so I had to find another job. So I worked at that other job, and that job, they had a beautiful heart, and it was a Christian school, and they took on students that couldn't pay, which ended up being the teachers didn't get paid. So it was like 3 months in a row where I didn't get paid. And I got everything, in the end, that was, they definitely were true on their word. But I'm like, this is so stressful. I can't live like this. And so that made me find another job. And then at that job, there was a bunch of stuff that happened with Korean parents, not different culture, other Asian parents, and culture clashes and culture differences, how they think you should be teaching, what they think happens at school. Parents in general.
Isn't that the same here, though?
It is.
Right? I was going to say.
It is. I shouldn't say, international school parents are interesting because they are paying so much.
Sure, right.
So they feel that entitlement to, you should teach the way that I want you to teach. And I'm like, well, I'm the educator, and I've gone to school for a long time to do this. So some stuff happened there that really made me lose my joy for teaching. I was like, why am I even doing this? And I, again, learned a lot about how to communicate with parents. But because of that, I had to, again, move to a different school. And that's, as I mentioned before, when I got to the best school I've ever worked at. Amazing. It was a inquiry-based program, IB school, which is another acronym, International Baccalaureate, and I got all this training. I worked with amazing people, and then I had to go to Australia, where everybody said, you're never going to find a teaching job.
Sure.
And I was like, actually, I think I am. And by that point, I was like, it's going to be fine. God's totally calling me. He's providing for me. I was terrified I wasn't going to find a place to live. Like, you always find something to worry about.
Right.
Like, I'm so weak in faith, God's not going to provide a place for me to live, and I'm going to be homeless, which is ridiculous. Like, it was fine. It was ridiculous. But then I, got this job at the school. So then after the 2 years there, I had to leave because my visa was expiring.
Yeah.
I wanted to leave.
Oh, I bet.
Because it was so challenging. And I was like, I grew a lot, learned a lot. I'm ready to go back to Michigan, which I never thought I would say. I thought I would end up in the Philippines. I thought I would end up building a school there and doing all this stuff. But you always have to have your hands open, right? You never know where God is going to lead you.
Yeah.
So I went, but when I was moving back from Australia to Michigan, I was like, I'm not going to get a job. I'm going to have to be a substitute teacher and live on my parents' couch. And there's many rooms. I would never be on a couch. They have beds. But I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna get a job. Like, when I left in 2009, teachers weren't getting jobs in Michigan. Like, they were being let go. So I had that mindset.
Right.
It's not going to happen. And God just laughed at me. Like, I just could feel his laughter of, have I not always provided for you?
So true.
And I was like, but this is the one time you're not going to, because I'm weak and I'm a sinner and my faith is not strong and it's not going to happen. And, within 2 months of moving home,
he hooked you up.
The one school, I applied to dozens and dozens and dozens of schools. And there was one school that called me, one principal who saw my name and felt God tug her heart back to that resume. Good. She works in the public school, but she's a Christian principal. She loves the Lord. And out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications, she was like, oh, I need to go back to that one. And then she read through my resume. It's like, we've got like a lot of international experience. That's really cool. It was the hardest interview process of my life.
I bet.
Because it's a very prestigious school district in Michigan.
Yeah, it is.
So all that to say, God has always been my provider. And I don't know why I doubted him.
So good.
But he's so faithful in that way.
It's interesting. You probably won't remember this. The first time I met you, you were at Western.
Oh, I do not remember.
And you were visiting your parents.
Okay.
And when we got saved, one of the things I love, like, families, like generational Christian impact, right? And you come from such a family of faith. Like your mom and dad, they were pillars. And I remember, probably like the first month we were here, your parents invited us over for a pool party. And I was thinner back then.
Oh my God.
They got a pool the year that I left, by the way. I went to college, they're like, let's get a pool.
It is amazing how things, you have more money when they're all
I know,
I'm just saying.
Yeah. But I remember me and the kids, and your dad was always so kind to Austin. He loved Austin. At least he faked like he loved Austin.
No, my dad.
You liked Austin, but he was so kind. I remember being there, and you were in the kitchen talking to Lindsay.
Okay.
And I remember hearing your laugh and thinking, she's just full of joy. And I remember.
That's so kind.
I remember thinking, if I can live my life the way Tim and Vicky do, that's how my kids will be. They'll be full of joy. And I don't think I saw you again for many years. I think you came back to visit for a wedding. Was the next time I saw you.
In and out.
Yeah, but I remember, I will never forget that, right?
Wow.
Like this, because in that first few months me and Mandy became Christians, there were people that really embraced us in the church. Your parents were one of them. And we just have so much admiration and love for them. They are amazing. And to see you now and to hear your story and to listen to you talk, you just see this lineage of faith that has gone into you. And I love that part we talked about your testimony. You got saved young, and you're around all these people that have some people the world would consider cool testimonies. I think the greatest testimony we could ever have is I've known the Lord all my life, and He always provided.
I totally agree.
And watching you experience Jesus and experience all the hardships you've gone through and all the good times you've gone through with faith has been, it's a representation of who your parents were and a representation of their faith. And I think this has been, an absolute joy to be able to chat with you and to talk about your journey and just to hear your story. And we're very glad you're back in Michigan, by the way. Very happy. And I just really have enjoyed this time. I hope you had a good time.
Yes, I feel like I didn't get to ask you guys any question. I just talked and talked and talked. It's like, hey, but I love that I'm going to say one more thing.
Yes,
I love that you brought up my parents and the way so I was in Korea for 5 years before they visited. Yeah. And I asked them every year, please come, please come, please come. This is where God's called me. You need to see. My dad did not want to come because of all it's a city of 10 million people.
Yeah.
There's way too many people. Yeah. But then when they came, they loved it. They had a wonderful time. But it was the first time that I got to hear their testimony because I was a part of a small group in my church, and it met in my tiny Korean apartment. And I told them, the time that you're here, these nights, is that okay? And they're like, we'd love to be a part of your small group. And I was at a church where it was all people in their 20s and their 30s, because it's people traveling, and that maybe they would get married there, but nobody had kids at that time, and there was not a lot of generational gaps in our congregation. You couldn't go to somebody who had been a Christian or walking with the Lord for 20, 30, 40 years. And so when my parents came, all my friends and the community was so eager to glean from them. But they're like, would they be willing to share their testimony? I'm like, I'll let me ask. And when I was sitting there and they were sharing their life story with me and my friends in the small group, I realized that I had never heard it. Wow. And it was really good. I'm sitting there what? Oh my gosh, you guys went through that with your parents, and this is how it happened. And because my dad grew up home, but he didn't get saved until he was, after he got married. And my mom was like, wait, what? I didn't realize this. But the way that they shared their story, and they went back and forth, bounced off each other, and you could tell that they'd done it so many times before. And I was like, why have I never paused to be like, hey, Mom, Dad, can you tell me your testimony? Tell me your story. And I was so grateful that I had that and had that memory of them talking about how God brought them through. Yeah. Because I can see that in my life. We said, the generational families of, this is why I have so much confidence in who I am and who God is.
So good. Well, listen, that's a beautiful story.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that memory. Oh my gosh.
I'm actually really disappointed you don't remember
I'm
us at
so
the pool party.
sorry. I mean, I would come in the summer and it was a blur, and then I would leave and go back wherever I was living. So.
Well, listen, this was an absolute joy, and thank you so much for sharing. I gotta tell you, I'm really so
I
grateful.
feel like you should publish your book too.
Yes, definitely.
Yes. They're sure, yeah. I need to do that.
Listen, we'd love to do this again with you at some point. This was
thanks, guys.
so great, and I know you just were able to. We don't have enough time to go through everything you could go into,
right.
but I really think this has been wonderful, and I just wanted to thank you.
Well, thank you for letting me share. It's been great.